Hey guys, and welcome to Tabby Talks, where we chat all things fitness, business, lifestyle, and a little bit of shit. I am really excited for today's episode, and today's episode is definitely targeted towards those evidence-based coaches, athletes that are looking to learn more about, I guess, hypertrophy, fat loss, even women, training around your menstrual cycle, all the little bits and bobs. But my guest on today was actually my first ever coach and someone who had a huge impact and still does to this day in my fitness journey and how I run my business, and someone who I highly recommend that you all do follow along with all the evidence that he puts out onto his Instagram, look at his socials, and definitely a big influence in the industry today. So yeah, has a, forgive me if I'm wrong, but a PhD in exercise science.
Correct, yeah.
And I'm literally, I tell everyone that he's one of the smartest people I know when it comes to
Appreciate hearing that.
training. So Martin, welcome.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to chat to you.
I know it's been a long time. I feel like I first came to you when I think I was 17.
Yeah, young. This was like 2020, I think.
Yeah, because you took me through all my certs as well, cert 3, 4. Yeah, it literally taught me everything. I swear sometimes even when I'm talking to clients these days, I refer back to things that you've taught me.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad I had that influence. But yeah, what a throwback. Like 2020, I think the prep was like throughout 2021.
Yeah.
Which was like during that COVID era. So, it's a tough time for everyone. But
yeah, it actually was a tough time. Yeah, because I think I ended up working on the gym floor. It was like for a month. And then we were like, no,
I
guys.
think things shut down then.
Yeah, it did. It completely shut down. So it was a really rough time. But I want to chat before we get into the episode more about how you actually got into the space, because the only reason I obviously found you wasn't like at the time. I mean, social media wasn't. It was a thing 5-6 years ago, but it wasn't as big as what it is now. Where so I'm sure most people are finding you that way now. Yeah. But obviously, I just went to JPS and that you were kind of just handed to me. But I want to know about how you got into the industry and yourself competing too.
Yeah, cool. So I started training when I was 16 and I started training to get better at footy. Yeah. But like with many people, that ends up transitioning to like you loving the gym and then you like moving on from your sport and just going all in to the gym. That's basically what happened to me. So like started training at 16, old school bodybuilding gym, and just fell in love with the environment. And I remember watching like personal trainers do their thing on the gym floor and I was like, oh yeah, maybe that could be me. Like it seems like I would enjoy living that lifestyle. Okay. And so I did my certs throughout school, my cert 3, cert 4, and landed a job as a PT at Anytime Fitness right after school. So I got into it pretty early at a young age. Was I ready to be a PT? Looking back, probably not. But, getting thrown in the deep end also has its benefits. There's lots of learning that takes place when you get thrown in the deep end, 100%. Even though you make a lot of mistakes. So that's how I got into PT, and then eventually got to JPS, and I've spent the rest of my kind of coaching career at JPS. But to kind of take a couple of steps back, how I got into competing was through being immersed in that environment and then watching like the Arnold Classic, the Mr. Olympia, and just being inspired by the athletes and the lifestyle they live. So it was always something I wanted to do, and I did it for the first time when I was 20. So I'd probably been training for like 4 or 5 years. Yeah. So still early in my training career, but I had stopped playing footy, so I was going all in to the gym, and it was a good experience. It was an interesting experience too, in the sense that it was like a classic 12-week prep, hard and fast, fish and rice cakes every day. Yeah. I hired an online coach who I didn't really know much about. Like again, social media wasn't really a thing back then, so he just popped up somewhere on my feed. That'll do. Hired him, and the prep was quite isolated as well, in the sense that I was working at Anytime Fitness and there was no bodybuilding culture there. Yeah. So it was kind of just me on my own getting through it. And I enjoyed the process. I mean, it was a good result. Like I ended up competing, and the person I actually competed against in the junior bodybuilding event was a guy who came to my school. Okay. So like we're the two guys who like used to train throughout school, that people would ask questions about the gym too, as that kind of naturally happens. And so I competed against him. That was cool. Ended up winning, which was like amazing. But then afterwards I was like, what do I do now?
You did 2 shows, didn't you?
I did 2 shows. Yeah. So the thing is, after that first one, I wasn't sure if I wanted to compete again because I realized it was such a kind of isolating sport. But then I found JPS and there was more of a team environment there. There was other competitors competing. And then I did end up competing again the year after. Yeah. And it was a much better overall experience, not just because I had a team environment to kind of bounce ideas off and to share the process with, share the journey with, but also the whole prep itself was different. So it was a longer prep, it was a more strategic prep, and it allowed for better outcomes, both mentally, physically, and so on, right? So that's how I got into it. And since then, I've been coaching competitors, working as a coach, obviously studying. So, is bodybuilding something I want to do again? I'm getting closer to saying yes to that. Like over the past few years, it was more like, I don't know, kind of depends on how things are going. But now that I've finished studying and I've kind of moved on from that, it's definitely something I see myself doing again and that I want to do.
Yeah. So for you, after you finished your shows, it wasn't an aspect of, okay, I want to grow now and get bigger for the next show. It was like, okay, I need to focus on my studies.
Yeah, it kind of naturally gravitated towards that because I was actually studying throughout both of my preps. And then after I kind of finished my undergrad, I moved on to a master's. And that's when things kind of started getting a little more serious. So I spent most of my time focusing on that and focusing on work.
And what was the pivotal moment for you that it was like, instead of just doing a Cert 3-4, you were like, no, I want to continue on here? Because you can just do a Cert 3-4 these days and build a huge business. We know that. But what was it for you that it was like, no, I want to take this a step further?
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree. Like, you don't have to have a university degree to be good at your job, no doubt. I guess I've always been interested in like the origin of knowledge. So like, how do we know what we know? Like when you read a textbook, read a paragraph, it's like you're learning from that, but how does that even come about? Is someone just making that up, or is that coming from some sort of research? And in most cases, what you read and what we know comes from years and years of research that just continues building. So I always found myself wanting to explore that and wanting to not just communicate information, but contribute to like building that information somehow, right? And it's obviously easier said than done. There's a lot of steps that you have to take to get there. So I did my master's, did some research throughout my PhD, and I'm still in the early stages of my like research career, but I'm on the way to kind of doing more of that, right? Contributing to actually the information base, right? Which is, I think, important because I also want to kind of leave things better than when I found them.
I love that,
and there's lots of gaps in exercise science. There's lots of gaps in any area of study that I've looked at and that I want to fill. So that's what kind of led me to doing a master's and then moving on to a PhD. It's just that urge to try and do better for the community.
I guess it's hard because, and even sometimes something I struggle with is if I'm trying to learn something new these days, there is so much out there that it's like, which one do I listen to? So I guess from your aspect, it's like, well, I'm going to figure it out myself and do the research myself and educate people on it, which definitely helps. It goes in towards your athletes. It goes towards yourself with your own progress as well. Do you feel like the more you've learned, the better it's helped you in your journey?
Good question. I think like what I do, what coaching is in general is quite a diverse skill set, right? So it has helped me throughout my journey, throughout my coaching journey, more so because it's helped me improve my thinking, my communication, my problem solving. And being a coach is really just being a problem solver. Like you're doing that on a daily basis. So any kind of endeavor that helps build those soft skills will contribute to you being a better coach. There is carryover there. So again, not that you have to do research to be a good coach. That's definitely not the case. But it has helped me in that regard.
So with the argument of someone being evidence-based versus someone like the bro science out there, obviously you're an evidence-based coach. What solidifies someone actually being evidence-based? Because there's everyone out there claiming that they are. It's in everyone's Instagram bio. What is the definitive answer to that?
Well, I can tell you what it isn't. It's not just reading research papers. It's not changing methods every time a new study comes out, right? It's not finding the absolute best way to execute an exercise. Those are things that seem to be portrayed as evidence-based. But for me, the first thing is you have to value research to an extent. You have to value the evidence that research provides us for and against ideas. And there's no evidence I can give you to help you value evidence.
No.
Right? It's just something that you have to inherently value, which is tough for some people because the main barrier for that is people sometimes struggle to put their biases aside. So you kind of have to be willing to put your bias to the side and listen to science communicators who are trying their best to communicate research findings and, you know, get us all closer to the truth. Okay. Now, some people will say, well, you know, I don't agree with what this person says, or, you know, this person doesn't agree with this person and they're both PhDs. How does that work?
Yeah.
The thing is, in every area of science, there's differing opinions, right? So even in like physics, people don't agree about everything. Like they agree on gravity, and there's other things that the PhDs in that area don't agree with. So science isn't really designed to give us certainty, and people are under the impression that that's what it's designed to do.
Yes.
It actually provides us with uncertainty. So like in research, when we get a study result, we get the result, but then we also have like, okay, this is the average, but it could be somewhere here and it could also be somewhere there. It's somewhere within these bounds. We don't exactly know where it lands, but it's probably somewhere in the average, in the middle, right? Okay. But it's giving us uncertainty. And as an evidence-based coach, you have to be willing to kind of accept that research doesn't give us the answers. It gets us closer to what we think might be the right answer.
Yep.
But we also have to be willing to put our thinking caps on and try to get there ourselves.
Yes.
Right? Research isn't going to give us those answers. So I think up front, having that type of mindset is really important, because a lot of the content these days that is geared towards things being science-based seems to tell people that this is the best way to go about things. It's black and white. This is the exercise you must do and you shouldn't do this one. Whereas that's not really the underlying message of science.
No, because it's not black and white.
It's never black and white. No. There's always context, right? And being an evidence-based coach means you understand context. So whenever you look at the results of research, you should never apply them immediately in practice.
Yeah.
There's multiple other things that you must consider. So for example, your client's preferences, right? The client, the individual that you're working with is important, because research tells us about averages amongst the population, but within that population, there are individuals who could respond a little bit differently, who have different preferences. So it's important to understand that we need to bridge the gap between research and practice. And we do that by, considering our client, and then also keeping in mind that we have our own individual experiences as athletes, as coaches, as humans, that we can rely on to an extent too. But the thing is, it's possible to have a lot of experience, but then what does that experience actually look like? So for example, there's many people who've been around in the industry for many years, but maybe they're not where they should be based on how long they've spent in the industry.
True.
Maybe they're a little outdated, right? Maybe they haven't changed their methods. Maybe they haven't taken any courses. They haven't done any further learning. So when we're talking about experience, it's important to try your best to make the most of the time that you spent in the industry by actively trying to learn more, right? By working with more clients, observing what has worked well across numerous clients, and then, putting it all together.
Because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach either.
It's not a one-size-fits-all. And you have to be able to put all that together, look at what the research says, look at the client right in front of you, and then come to a decision about what to do.
Yeah.
And that really is the essence of evidence-based coaching. It's finding a way to bring all three of those aspects together and make good decisions for your clients.
Okay, so it's not really an aspect of like, if I've got a question, it's not like who I should go to that produces the best evidence out there and look at what they're doing and they're like, yeah, they're right or wrong. It's to sort of collect all of it and put it in a framework for my clients. It's like figuring out what works for me and them.
Yeah.
So it's not like we were saying, it's not black or white. That's the answer that's going to work. It's almost trial and error.
100%. And like I said before, people's opinions will differ, and that's completely fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Again, it's just a natural part of the learning process. An evidence-based coach should listen to numerous different science communicators who are trying to bridge the gap. But at the end of the day, you need to come up with your own framework.
Yeah.
And you also need to trust in your framework. What I find these days is with social media trends, they push coaches in certain directions. They nudge them in certain directions. And if you don't trust in your framework and your coaching philosophy, you will get pushed in a direction that maybe, you shouldn't be pushed towards at this point in your career, simply based on what's trending on social media. So the best coaches are the ones who have a philosophy, who stick to it, who get results with their clients, and then who tinker with it over time based on what they're hearing, right? But they're not just taking that information and applying it immediately. They're thinking about it. They're thinking about what they currently do, whether there's any overlap, what the trade-offs are if I am to take on some new information. And then, like I said, they just tinker with their philosophy, with their framework slowly over time.
Yeah.
And it does change, but it doesn't change completely overnight.
Yeah. And with all, obviously you knowing so much yourself, do you think it's important to be educating every single client that comes to you? Or do you think it's a matter of what their goals are? Because I've got some clients that come to me and they're like, I just want to lose 10 kilos in 10 weeks. Don't give a shit how I get there. Do you think it's important for a client to be educated around how they're doing it? And how do you know whether or not to teach the client or to just follow a strict plan for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think education is an important part of the process, more so because you want clients to eventually become autonomous to an extent.
Okay.
So as coaches, what we are trying to do is improve our clients' self-efficacy, right? So the belief that they have in themselves.
Yeah.
Now, there's multiple different ways you can go about doing that, but one of the ways is teaching them how to be autonomous, how to be competent, and they need to have some level of relatedness with you or with other people in the industry as part of community.
Agreed. Yeah.
Now, that's the self-determination theory. So how can we motivate a client towards their goals and get them to the point where they believe in what they're doing, they believe in their abilities, and they can adhere to the plan without us always having to be messaging them and making sure they're onto it. So education plays a role in that, because if you can educate a client to eventually get them to the point where they can make some decisions on their own without having to run those decisions by you, that's a component of autonomy. And that can help, because if a client realizes that they can, take ownership over some components of their training and their nutrition,
they'll be more likely to stick to it.
They're more likely to stick to it because they have belief in what they're doing. Like they do it once and it works, and like, okay, that worked really well. Let me tell my coach about that. And the coach's role is to say, hey, great job, you made a good decision, and maybe you should also consider these things next time too.
100%.
So education plays a role in that. It also plays a role in competency. So you want the client to be not only autonomous at what they're doing, but good at what they're doing as well. So good in the gym when they're training on their own, good with their nutrition, they know what they need to do, they're on top of it. And there has to be some level of education to get someone to that point.
For sure.
Now, like you said before though, some clients will need more education than others. So I think it's just a matter of toggling how much education you kind of inject into the process, because you're right, some clients come to you, they don't care as much, they want to get results. But even if they don't care, there's probably still some nuggets of information that you can throw at them that will be useful for getting them to that point we mentioned
because
earlier.
I do always say, like, if you understand why you're doing something, you are going to be more likely to follow it at the end of the day, and be able to follow it for a longer period of time as well. Like, I know with myself, whenever my coach, anyone's ever changed something in my plan, I've always asked them why I'm doing it, because I'm going to be more likely to stick to it if I actually have an understanding of why. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think you also have to be smart about what type of education you give your clients. So, like, do I need to be teaching my clients about exercise science? Not so much.
No. Yeah.
Some maybe yes, others likely not. So a good trait of a coach is, and an evidence-based coach as well, is understanding things at like a slightly higher level.
Yeah.
And like what that level looks like depends on like you and the courses you've done in the past and all that stuff. But you need to understand things at a higher level and then be able to distill them for your clients.
For sure.
So like my goal is to always know 5 levels more than what I'm speaking to anyone about, right? So I try and have 5 levels of, I guess, interpretation.
Like, what level do I need to give them?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when I first started coaching, when I first got into the industry, that wasn't the case. It was like the same message was thrown at everyone. And over time, you start to realize that, you have to kind of meet people where they're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people, right, don't even know that like 150 grams of chicken doesn't equal 150 grams of protein, right? And there's so many times I've had these conversations with coaches and they're like, really, people don't understand that? And I'm like, yeah, some people don't understand that because they've just never needed to understand that. So you need to be open to that, that type of messaging, even if it sounds like it's common sense.
Because do you have a particular niche that you would say come to you or work with you?
Mostly people who want to improve their body composition.
So is it people that also want the knowledge?
Yes, in most cases, for me, people do tend to come to me because they want to know a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It keeps me going, keeps me alert. It keeps my communication effective because I'm consistently trying to be versatile with the way I speak. But yeah, I think as coaches, we sometimes suffer, and as humans in general, the curse of knowledge, which means you forget what it's like to be back where you were 5-10 years ago. You forget what it's like to be a beginner. Like, maybe once upon a time I didn't know that 150 grams of chicken had only had 30 grams of protein. Right? Maybe that was me at one point, but you tend to forget that. And I think it's important to continually remind yourself that, hey, people are at different levels and you have to meet them where they're at.
So I want to chat about some of the misconceptions that we do see. So going into this with some of your clients that are complete beginners, we'll send this towards females because I know we have a lot of female listeners. With a typical female that comes to you, that someone who's a little bit younger, what is a typical misconception that you usually get thrown at?
I mean, there's a few. One that comes to mind is the idea that you have to stop your sets at a certain number of reps, right? So, we have this idea that to build muscle, you need to be somewhere in the 8 to 12 range. To build strength, you need to be somewhere between the 1 to 6 range. And if you stop at 7, it's like nothing happens at 7. That's what some people tend to think. But in reality, when it comes to building muscle, which is what a lot of my clients come to me for, like I said, for body composition, whether it's male or female, it's the same underlying principle. We care less about the exact number of reps that you stop a set on and more about how close to failure you're actually getting. Yeah,
I was looking on your Instagram and you actually did something on this, whether higher frequencies or lower frequencies is better for muscle growth, right?
A few things. I think whether pushing to failure or shy from failure is
optimal.
It seems that the number of reps is less important than the proximity to failure. Right? So whether you do 8, 9, 13 or 15 reps, what basically signals your muscle to grow is
the rate of perceived exertion.
That and the muscle fiber activation. So how many fibers are actually being activated, how much tension they're experiencing, and that's independent of the reps. So you can achieve that at any number of reps as long as you're pushing close to failure.
Okay, interesting. Yep.
So, clients will come to me and usually what I do when I'm working with a new client is I'll say, hey, I'm on the gym floor for the first time. I want you to do a working set and I'm just going to watch it. I'm just going to watch what you think is a working set. And most people will just stop at 8 or they'll stop at 10 or 12. Those are the pretty common numbers. And then my role from there is to say, hey, what I actually need you to do is basically don't count your reps, just keep pushing until those reps start to slow down.
Yeah.
Because that's the strike zone. That's where we actually want to be if we're trying to build muscle.
Yep.
If we're trying to change your physique.
Yeah.
And so I use RIR in that case to teach people that they need to train harder, right? So there's this idea that, RIR is used to help people train less hard and to regulate their intensity. But in many cases, I'm using it to say, hey, you stopped at 12 reps and you still had like 5 reps in the tank.
Yeah.
So I want you to stop your set, when you're like 1 rep shy from failure, which means you just need to do more or you need to go heavier.
So what is the main difference between RIR and the use of RPE?
There's a few differences. I mean, it kind of depends on how you use it. It's just kind of inversed usually. So a 7 RPE is sometimes considered a 3 RIR. I think in the case of my clients and the people I work with and most people, RIR is a bit more intuitive.
Okay.
Because it's simply telling you how many reps shy from failure you are. And so that's the messaging I try and give these types of clients is that, hey, going forward, let's not worry about the exact number of reps you do.
Yep.
Worry about your proximity to failure. I'll give you a rep range on each exercise, but the rep range is there to basically tell you how much load I want you to be lifting.
Yeah.
Like if I tell you do 6 to 10 reps, that's going to be a heavier load than 15 to 20 reps.
100%. Yeah.
So that's one key misconception is like, we don't have to stick to a certain number of reps. We need to focus more on proximity to failure.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Another one is that ties into what I just spoke about. A lot of people also stop their sets when they start to feel the burn.
Yes.
Right? When they start to feel perceived discomfort.
Yeah.
And it's so common for people to think that that's when things start kicking in, right? But like I said before, the signal that drives muscle growth is, okay, how many muscle fibers are being activated?
Yep.
What type of fibers are they? They need to be the big, fast twitch fibers. And how much tension are they experiencing, right? Those are the kind of three kind of basic things we're looking at. And perceived discomfort, that feeling that you get, that unpleasant sensation of like burning muscles that some people consider as pain, that doesn't always tell you that you've ticked those 3 boxes.
Okay.
So it definitely tells you that your muscles are active.
Undergoing tension, yeah.
Undergoing some level of tension, but is that tension enough to get the most out of the set that you're doing?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's not the case. So it is possible, for example, to feel a high level of perceived discomfort, but still be 5-6 reps away from failure.
Yes.
So there seems to be a disconnect between what some people think is like a truly effective set where they're pushing close to failure, right? And
an actual effective set.
Yeah, and what actually is an effective set.
Yeah.
Right. And that disconnect is because perceived discomfort starts to cloud people's judgment.
Yes, because I guess it's like, how do you judge, like how do you teach someone to train hard?
Yeah.
That's kind of the question.
Yeah. And I mean, it's easier said than done because people have different levels of pain tolerance.
They do, yeah.
And so some clients have a high pain tolerance and they're going to be much easier to teach how to train hard and how to get past that barrier. And others, on the other hand, don't have a very high pain tolerance at all.
Yeah.
They're very sensitive to some of these feelings, which is just something to keep in mind as a coach.
Yep.
You know, some people just need to be nudged in that direction a little more, others less so. But I would say that, you know, understanding the difference between a fatiguing set where the reps are actually slowing down and a set that just prompts a bit of discomfort can be like a key in like instigating more progress for some people.
And obviously you do both online coaching and coaching in person. Do you find, because you're able to see a client in person, those are the clients that see better results?
Yes. Online coaching is harder if we're speaking about teaching clients how to train hard.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, you know, if I was with you on the gym floor and I was taking you through an exercise, it'd be much easier for me to help you get to where I want you to be.
For sure.
Whereas online, there's a lag time between you sending me a video and me critiquing it and then you doing it again next week. So yeah, I think face-to-face clients get better results, but also online coaching for me seems to bring in a different type of clientele. Like it's a more advanced clientele that are already pretty competent.
Yep.
They probably already know mostly how to train hard enough, and I'm just kind of fine-tuning things for them. So it's a slightly different ball game in that sense.
But for training hard, then
For training hard. But like I said before, one of the first things I do when I'm working with any client is I get them to do what they think is a working set.
Good, yeah.
Because that tells me a lot about the client. If someone does a working set and they're like pushing very close to failure, I'm like, okay, this person knows what they're doing. I just need to fine tune a few things for them in their program. If someone's stopping really early when they feel that burn set in or when they hit the 10th rep, it's like, okay, this is what we need to start doing now to take you to the next level. We need to raise the bar with your training.
Okay, interesting. So going on to another misconception that I wanted to chat about is females training around the menstrual cycle. Okay. This is something that I need to do a little bit more learning on as well, because it's something I've always kind of just, I rock up to the gym and if I feel good, I feel good. I don't monitor throughout the month. Do you think it's something that needs to be monitored in regards to if someone's in a fat loss phase? Do you think it's an appropriate thing to have to measure someone's menstrual cycle for how they're going to train?
Okay. So yeah, years ago, you'd come across a lot of content that spoke about the importance of like menstrual cycle periodization, where training and nutrition is planned around someone's menstrual cycle. And this comes from the idea that, in the follicular phase, that the first half of the menstrual cycle, a female may be more primed to train, maybe more primed to take on nutrients. And then in the second half of the menstrual cycle, in the luteal phase, things kind of get reversed.
Yeah.
And so maybe training should be a little lighter
Reduced.
and food might look a little different. But we did have some research that pointed in that direction. But when you zoom out and look at all the research and you look at kind of the average result across all studies, it doesn't seem like planning training around the menstrual cycle has any effect on strength and performance.
Yeah.
On average. Okay. Now, that's something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that in practice, if you were to plan training and nutrition around the menstrual cycle, it would be a bit tricky. And it's tricky because there is no normal cycle length.
No.
Okay. So the textbook average is like 28, but it can range from 21 up to like above 30. And it's hard to know exactly where you are in your cycle. And that's because the length of the cycle can change from month to month within a female.
Yeah.
It's different across females. So as a coach, it's a bit confusing because you can't just apply the same thing to everyone. It's hard to keep up.
Yeah.
Which is why it's important to track if you think it's important. We can get to that soon. But then also, like in some of these studies that kind of look at this thing, they tend to estimate when a female is in like a certain part of her menstrual cycle because it's quite hard to do the things necessary to know for sure that she's in the follicular phase or luteal phase.
I get that, yeah.
So for example, to know for sure, you need to have either a blood sample, urinary sample, or a saliva sample.
We do that every month.
Yeah, it's hard to do. Like you wouldn't do it every month. It'd be hard to do. And in research, it's also hard to do. So a lot of the studies we have, to be fair, are a little limited in the sense that we're just kind of estimating or guessing where the female is in her period, in her menstrual cycle based on her app.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
So we kind of have to look at the research and say, okay, planning and periodizing training nutrition around the menstrual cycle doesn't seem to have much of an impact on strength performance, but a lot of these studies are limited. Okay, in practice, it's hard to plan anyway because of all these differences, and when a female ovulates can change from month to month, right? And like it's hard to know exactly what day that's happening on. So the end result of all that is, okay, is it going to be worth it to really put this much time and effort into planning around the menstrual cycle? Maybe not. Maybe there's bigger rocks that you should be trying to achieve, right? Or other things that you should be trying to focus on prior to doing that. Now, in some cases though, the female symptoms at certain points throughout the menstrual cycle make it a good idea for you to kind of pay more attention to that.
Okay,
Right? So again, what I'm speaking about is like on average, there's other things that a female should probably be worried about when it comes to her training and nutrition. Like menstrual cycle planning is like lower down that order of importance. But I have clients, for example, who like a week before their period, every month consistently, like they have lower back pain. Like they just feel a little more vulnerable in the gym. They don't feel as strong. So with those types of people, I do put a little more planning into their nutrition and into their training. And it's a matter of anticipating these things happening and these feelings arising and putting a plan in place to try and limit the chance of injury. Or to try and make the female just feel a bit better with the whole process during that period of time. Okay, so it is quite a complex topic. A recent study also found that no matter when you train in the menstrual cycle, the response, the anabolic response to that training is the same.
Interesting.
So for example, the way the study would work is I'd bring you into the lab. And this was a study where they actually took, I think, saliva samples, or they took one of those three that I mentioned earlier, either blood, urine, or saliva to know for sure that you're in your follicular phase. I'd then put you through a training protocol. I'd assess your anabolic response. There's different ways and we can do that. We check your muscle protein synthesis, for example. And then I'd bring you back in the luteal phase, right? Do the same things, make sure that is, the stage that you're in your menstrual cycle, make you do the same workout and then assess your anabolic response again. And across, numerous women in this study, it seemed to be the same.
Yes.
Right. So even in the luteal phase, despite, the increase in progesterone that we see, the female body can still respond to training just the same as it does in the follicular phase.
So your best piece of advice would honestly be to go off feel and probably not to put too much focus on the
For
phase.
the most part, yes, because if you were to plan a deload every week prior to your period, but you happen to feel fine,
you're holding back.
Yeah. And if we know you can still respond well in that week, you are going to be losing out over time. So this is why I said earlier that menstrual cycle planning is just a little lower on the order of importance.
Yes,
Doesn't mean we
totally
throw it
get
out
that.
and we don't worry about it. It's just there's other things that we need to consider first. And going based off feel and anticipating for some people certain feelings arising is a good idea.
You did mention though that there's potential changes in nutrition with some of your clients.
Yeah.
What are the changes to nutrition that you would potentially make?
Yeah, so that also depends on, again, how they feel. Hunger, cravings, all those things. I try not to take things I tend not to make things too complex. At the end of the day, if someone's in a contest prep, for example, and we're working on a timeline, there's only so many changes I can actually make to the plan. So it does get a little bit tricky because do I give you more food, but I need you to be lean before a certain time?
I think comp prep's kind of a different
ball game.
Yeah, for sure.
The other clients I have, it kind of would just depend on whether they're tracking or not. Depends on the phase of nutrition they're in. I try not to overcomplicate it, and it kind of be the same for any other client I have who just comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm just feeling really hungry lately. My appetite's changing. What should I do?" And I'll just give them the same advice, whatever I think is necessary for them.
Okay.
So it's nothing.
It's not even necessarily like a menstrual cycle thing.
Yeah, not really. Okay. Not really. Yeah, I tend not to overcomplicate that.
I think that's important. So we've obviously spoken about the female's menstrual cycle and their ability to put on muscle. It's pretty much the same no matter what. Now let's compare males to females with their ability to put on tissue. Do you see big differentiations between a men's ability to put on muscle compared to a female's?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question that I've done a bit of research on actually. And so I did a study on this and I did a meta-analysis, which is basically taking all the studies in an area and then looking at the average result, which is a really good way to do things. It's a high quality way of doing research because it's not just looking at one study, it's looking at all the studies in a given area. And all these studies compared males and females. They put them through the same training program and they measured how much muscle they actually grew.
Were they previously trained individuals or untrained?
So there was a mix. So some untrained, some resistance trained.
Yeah.
The physiology of the body still responds in a similar way between untrained and resistance trained. So it doesn't matter too much if we bring them together. But I did also do a separate analysis to see if training status made a difference. And this study was actually published, properly published, last night. So something I'll be posting about soon. So I looked at the average result across all the studies. And what I found was that the males build more absolute muscle mass than the females. When I say absolute, I mean, if we're thinking of it in kilos, they build more muscle mass in kilos than females do, only slightly more. But the relative change in muscle size, the relative muscle hypertrophy is actually quite similar between the sexes. So what relative means in this sense is the percentage change from the starting point. And when you think about it, on average, females have a lower starting point than males when it comes to muscle mass.
For sure.
So they're starting with a lower level. And so I might build 5 kilos of muscle over 12 months. That would be amazing. You might build 3 kilos of muscle. But for both of us, it might be a 5% change.
Right.
Because you're starting at a lower
Makes
baseline.
Sense. Okay, yes.
I'm starting higher, right? So the relative change in muscle size is something we should pay probably more attention to because it considers your starting point. And so males are only building more absolute muscle size likely because they start at a higher level to begin with.
Right.
So this means that the potential though to build muscle between males and females is the same. It's very similar because the relative change is the same. It just looks different. Males are always going to be larger on average because they start off with more due to
Does this mean
hormonal
that
reasons.
If you're monitoring a client's progress, you would want to see a faster rate of gain than for the males?
You would probably notice it more
Okay.
because the absolute change is larger. if I put on a kilo of muscle, you put on 500 grams, it might be more noticeable on me.
Yes.
But it might be the same percentage change.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So, people will say, but men have more testosterone, and that's true. But it seems that testosterone, which is like 10 to 15 times higher in males, is what leads to the changes we see in muscle size after puberty. So like boys and girls often have like the same amount of muscle size. And when boys go through puberty, right, their muscle size increases drastically due to the surge in testosterone.
Yeah.
So at adulthood, men are starting off with more muscle mass than females on average. But then when those two, demographics, males and females, start training, right, the relative change from their starting point seems to be similar.
Interesting. Okay. So when we do talk about rate of gain, kind of two things with this question. What is the difference of when we're gaining? So I'll ask the first one first. Yep. What is the rate of gain that you like to see for a female when they're in a building phase?
Yeah. I mean, that is a hard question to answer, because the other thing to consider is like, there are also genetic differences. Okay. So some people will just respond faster than others.
Yes.
And that kind of muddies the water a little bit. It's similar to a male, because if we think about it as a percentage of your like body weight, it's like, it's going to be similar anyway. So 1 to 2%, weight gain per month might be something we kind of
to go off
to be something we look at. But there's other things to consider too. It's like some people will build muscle and their body weight won't change that much because maybe they're losing fat at the same time.
Yeah.
So I don't really have, like for my clients, a rate of gain that I'm really using to guide my decision making. I'm trusting in my program. I'm taking visual shots of them if it's important that they build muscle, checking their scale weight. And if their performance in the gym is going up, they're eating their protein, scale weight's not going down, right? It's staying the same or going up. I can be pretty confident that they're gaining muscle.
Okay, yeah.
And that's roughly the way I go about it.
And what's the percentage of rate of muscle compared to rate of fat? So if someone is gaining, say, 250, 300 gram increases per week, what percentage of that is actually fat? Is there numbers?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because it depends on how many total calories you're consuming. So it seems that eating more calories and being in a larger surplus does allow you to build a little more muscle.
Yes.
But it also means you gain a lot more fat. And so is it really worth it? For a lot of people, the answer to that question is no.
Yeah.
So in the grand scheme of things, a small surplus for a lot of people is enough to maximize muscle growth. Maybe eating more would get them a little more, but it's just not worth the trade-off
of getting more body fat
at that point. That's right. So, with a lot of my female clients, the first part of the process, the first stage is just helping them build muscle without really worrying too much about their body weight.
Okay. Yeah.
Like you can build muscle and just not wake up every morning wanting the scale to go up.
Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So in many cases, they'll be able to build muscle with their weight roughly just hovering around, like eating, let's say, around maintenance calories.
Yeah.
Some days a little higher, sometimes maybe a little lower. And then depending on how important and significant their muscle building goals are, we will then decide whether or not we should go into a surplus, a proper surplus.
I was going to say, so the rate of gain, does it really make a difference being at maintenance compared to a surplus? Yes.
Not as much. I mean, I think a surplus is the ideal place to be in. Yeah. So it would influence the rate of gain. But at the end of the day, it is possible to build muscle at maintenance. It is possible to build muscle in a deficit.
Yeah.
Ideally, I think a surplus is the best place to be. But a lot of my clients, a lot of female clients I work with, they don't want to maximize muscle growth anyway.
No.
Like, yeah, in certain areas they do, but it's not like they want to maximize muscle growth as much as a bodybuilder does.
For sure.
So I'm happy to say, hey, let's just keep it around maintenance now.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe you could be building a little more muscle, but you probably also don't want some of the fat that would come with that. And then if they're happy to like say, hey, they might say, hey, I'm actually okay with gaining a little bit of body fat, like it doesn't concern me that much. I'm pretty happy with the way I look, then we can maybe think about taking it to the next level.
And I know before you slightly touched on that you did do a research on trained versus untrained. So what are your thoughts on the whole newbie gains situation? Do you think that someone does need to actually make use of newbie gains? And is there a difference between someone that's just getting into the gym versus someone who has been in the gym for 5-6 years?
Yeah. So in the study that I did before, the training status of the person didn't seem to impact the differences between males and females. So both the trained demographic of males and females and the untrained demographic of males and females built the same amount of relative muscle hypertrophy. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yep.
When it comes to newbie gains, people who haven't trained before, they definitely make progress a lot faster than others who have been more exposed to the stimulus of training. I think the newbie gains is an interesting one because sometimes people will just get into the gym and they won't really have any guidance and they're young and they've just started and they kind of just do whatever they see online.
Yeah.
And it works because everything works. And then they kind of carry that on and they say, 2 to 3 years later down the track, they say, oh, I've been doing this because it worked for me, when I first started. So I'm going to continue doing it. But that doesn't mean it's the best way to go about things.
Yeah.
So basically anything can work early on. Yes, you could argue some things might work better than others, but because people are progressing so fast, even a pretty average training program or an average style of training can yield amazing results when someone's first started. So I think beginners would really benefit from having some guidance in the early stages of their career, their training career, because if you can just be set up with the right, I shouldn't say right because there's no right or wrong way to do things. There's better and worse. But if you can be set up with a better way to train, a better kind of methodology, good nutrition strategies, etc., that's going to set you up for down the track.
For sure.
And you might make the same amount of progress in the first 2 years as you would if you're following an average program, but down the line, over time, having good nutrition and training habits instilled and ingrained can yield great benefits, can set you up. And I wish I had that type of guidance when I was younger. I don't regret the guidance that I had or the lack of guidance that I had because I was just looking at bodybuilders and copying what they were doing. And you learn from that too.
Yeah, you do.
But I mean, it would have been amazing to have a coach, when I first started out that kind of nudged me in the right direction.
I think honestly, that was the best thing I did. Like before I came to you, I think I trained maybe
That's
for
a good example, yeah.
Yeah. I was probably only training
You're doing
for
group class and stuff, weren't you?
Yeah, not really any. I don't think I ever did a group class. Like I had been going to Snap Fitness for probably like 6 months. But remember my mum had done a show and she had done it at JPS. So I was kind of learning off her. But I mean, I was 17. So the best thing I did was my mum just to be like, okay, look, just go get a coach and you can learn from them.
She prompted you.
She prompted me. So it wasn't even me because like we had a gym at home and I was like trying to do things and I didn't even really have like a massive goal, but it was from her perspective being like, I think it's in your best interest just to have someone educate you so you're not going off into the open. And that's the best thing for me because even I have ladies coming to me now who are like 30. Yeah. They have no knowledge and they've been trying to do it themselves for 15 years. That's
the point I'm trying to make, And
I'm like, honestly, just make an investment to have a PT or some kind of coach to educate you for a short period of time can set you up for so much long-term success. And I do believe that. So you do all your coaching everything now or do you have someone look over it?
At the moment I am.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question that I wanted to chat about is more so nutrition. And a big one that I always get is of the anabolic window. Okay. So carbohydrates, what's the importance of the peri-workout nutrition? Do you think it's vital to have like that last meal within 90 minutes after training? Yeah. How important is the meal prior, the intra-workout? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think protein in the case of muscle growth is the most important macronutrient.
Yep.
Now, the question is, do you have to eat protein right after you train? And, the answer depends on, when you're training. So, for example, if you were to train fasted and you trained fasted every day, you're training in what we could kind of call the catabolic state because you've been fasted for quite some time. Yeah. You've been sleeping for, let's say, 8 hours.
For sure.
And basically what happens when you're not feeding and you're fasted is your body uses its own nutrients to create energy, right? Okay. So it'll break down its own body fat to create energy from the body fat.
Yep.
But it'll also break down its own muscle tissue to create amino acids, because amino acids are really important in the body, and they're used to build many different things, many different molecules. And so your body is happy to also break down muscle tissue, create amino acids, and then send them out to the rest of the body.
Right.
Now, when you train in a fasted state, that's basically what's happening physiologically, and training doesn't really help that, right? Training doesn't inherently increase muscle protein synthesis. It actually contributes a little more to breakdown.
Okay.
Because you're disturbing the metabolism, the homeostasis of the muscle. What contributes mostly to muscle protein synthesis is training and then consuming protein afterwards, right? Now, when I say afterwards, I don't mean right after the session. I just mean in some proximity post-training.
Is there a time frame on this?
Yeah, that time frame is more important if you're training fasted, because you've had so much muscle protein breakdown over the past hours that it's in your best interest to get protein in sooner rather than later if you're training fasted. That would be my general advice to anyone who trains fasted regularly. So have a shake and drink it after your training, or go home and have your breakfast. Make sure you're consuming protein.
Would the advice not be as well to be eating before you train?
Yes. I mean, ideally, yes. But some people have to get up and, like, if they're training at like 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., like, they just get to the gym.
So for you, like, you're not going to argue with the client if they're like, I have to train fasted.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue. I'd say, hey, let's just think about how we can optimize your nutrition around that training window.
Yep.
If it's a protein shake prior to training, I'm good with that.
Okay.
If it's a protein shake after training, I'm also good with that. Do I have a preference? Maybe pre-training and then like a breakfast after training with more protein. That would be good, like sandwiching the session.
Yes.
But then some people say, I don't feel like drinking protein shake before I train so early.
No, I wouldn't want to either.
Okay, that's fine. You know, so it's more important to have protein soon after your training if you're training fasted, or at least that would be my recommendation. And then during the day, it's less important to eat protein right after training because you have multiple other meals throughout the day where you're consuming protein, and there's generally always going to be some amino acids in your bloodstream, right? It might take like 3 hours to digest that protein, break it down to amino acids and let the body absorb it. So if you were to, for example, have a meal at like 11 o'clock with protein, train at like 12:30 while you're training, and after you train, you're probably still absorbing some of those amino acids. So it's not as much of an issue if you wait a little longer to have your next meal.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
The most important factor is your total daily protein intake for the day. That's the most important factor. And even though some recent research has found your body can absorb like up to 100 grams of protein in one sitting, I still recommend spreading it quite evenly throughout the day if you can. So the usual recommendation is like 3 to 5 meals throughout the day. Spread your protein out quite evenly across those meals and make sure that you're having a decent amount of that after your training. Now, it's even more important if you have clients or if individuals are only training like 1, 2, or 3 times a week, because that anabolic window, it doesn't just last a few hours. It might last up to 24 hours and sometimes even longer. But if you're only training twice a week, let's say you train Monday and Thursday, that anabolic window for you is like on the Monday and the Tuesday, right? And then on the Thursday and the Friday. So it's important that on those days, you make sure you're getting enough protein in, if not a little bit more than you might get on other days, because that's when you're going to be able to use that protein and push it towards the muscle tissue that you've just trained.
So you wouldn't say that when we're talking about peri-workout, you wouldn't necessarily say it's like protein's more important than carbs. You'd more so say, protein's more important for muscle growth, the carbs are more important for the performance aspect.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So carbohydrate doesn't seem to directly impact muscle growth, or at least we don't think that is the case, but it can influence your training.
Definitely.
And how you train is going to impact how much muscle you grow, how well you perform. So I think it's wise to use carbohydrate as a tool to fuel your recovery and to try and improve your performance. And, that might look like pre-workout meal, intra-workout shake, post-workout meal with carbohydrate to fuel recovery. So it can look like a few different things. I think for most people, anywhere between 3 to 7 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight is usually a good range. And, some people might find it hard to eat a lot of carbohydrate. And so you start them on the lower end and you build it up. But yes, that's the way you should look at it. Protein is boosting our muscle protein synthesis. It's going to help us build muscle. Carbohydrates going to help us recover from our training and improve our performance. And therefore, that might impact
total sense.
The amount of muscle we can grow over time.
And I know you were talking about the amino acids before in a fasted state. Would you suggest someone would benefit from supplementing with like amino acids if they're fasted?
Possibly, yes. Especially if someone is in a calorie deficit. The implications of that do possibly require some like amino acid intervention, I guess you could call it. So EAAs, for example, are quite popular. And they're the amino acids you do want to be drinking.
For sure.
Or consuming, essential amino acids. They're the ones that your body actually uses for muscle protein synthesis, and your body can't manufacture those on its own. So basically, when you are in a deficit, your muscle protein synthesis is lowered. Even at a resting level, it's lowered. So you don't get as much as you usually do from the same amount of protein. And in leaner individuals, it's possible for your muscle protein breakdown to be higher than usual as well.
Right.
So when you consider both of those factors, it might make sense to supplement with an intra-workout drink that involves or that includes EAAs. Does the research on that show substantial benefits? Not from my understanding. But if it's something that you can adhere to and it's something that
helps you,
that you may think helps you, and that you can purchase a supplement and it's fine, then it's probably not a bad idea. It's not going to have a negative impact. It can only have a neutral or positive impact.
That's true. That's true.
In saying that, if you have a protein shake prior to training, though, it's like that kind of takes care of it anyway. If you're training fasted.
What about the thoughts on fiber and fats peri-workout?
Yeah, so the usual advice there is to keep them low because they delay gastric emptying, which basically slows down the digestion process. So basically, when you consume food, you need to digest it, absorb it, and then send it into the tissue, right? And that's called assimilation. So higher fats and fiber in a meal just slow down that process. And before training, you kind of want to get carbs in and into the muscle as fast as possible, right? So keeping your fats and fiber low is usually recommended prior to training. After training, it's probably less important because the urgency of getting the kind of nutrients in to the muscle straight away is just a little bit lower. So it's less important post-workout, but pre-workout, a good pre-workout meal would be a fast digesting carbohydrate, low fat, low fiber, and enough protein to stimulate muscle protein synthesis so that you don't have to have a protein shake right after you finish training and you can just, have your next meal.
And when would be the use of an intra-workout? When to determine that someone would need that?
Good question. That one would be if I have a client who is training for like longer than 60 minutes, particularly a client who's quite strong and expending a lot of energy or who's doing high volumes and is training legs because legs just spends more energy than upper body, that's when I would recommend an intra-workout. If the client has enough calories to fit that intra-workout in. So if they're in a deficit, it's like maybe we can make that work initially. More so if someone's in a surplus, then we should do that because you've got calories to work with and it's not a problem. So my general rule of thumb is if training is lasting longer than 60 minutes or someone's training legs, we can look into employing an intra-workout drink. What's that going to look like? Well, it's mostly going to be water, obviously, because you want to stay hydrated. Carbohydrate for energy and to keep your blood sugar levels up. And some sodium or electrolytes in general also wouldn't hurt, especially if it's hot. So that's another thing to consider. In the heat, so during summer, I'm more inclined to recommend an intra-workout drink because people lose more sweat, they lose more water when they're training in summer. And so replenishing that is a good idea and probably more important. So, losing up to 2% of your total body water can lead to performance detriments, performance decline. And I'm not saying that always happens to everyone in summer, but if you're training for like 2 hours and you're training legs in the heat, like it's possible. So it's something you want to consider while you're training because the way you should think about it is, the intra-workout environment is going to influence your recovery as well. And your recovery is basically your pre-workout for the next day's training session.
For sure.
Right? So it's all connected. So the better you can recover from one session, both during and after, the better you're going to be set up for the next one.
Okay. So I want you to give a piece of advice of what you would give, I guess, to your younger self getting back into the industry knowing nothing, or even to someone listening to this who doesn't really know where to start. What's the best piece of advice that you would give to them?
I guess, I mean, what worked for me is, I'm not saying it's going to work for everyone, but I mean, I only know now looking back.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't know during, but what worked for me was just picking something that I enjoyed doing and just going all in on it.
Yeah.
And I was lucky to find my passion, I guess, early on.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to find your passion early on, but if you find something that you have some ambition for, then it's probably in your best interest to try and devote a lot of time to it and go all in on it. Now, that doesn't mean that you sacrifice everything else in your life. There's always room for other things, but it's like you're devoting just more time and attention to it and, push the limits as to what you think you're capable of doing. So I've always been like a proponent of like, just say yes to things.
Yeah.
Like if you have an opportunity and you're young and it's in line with your ambition, just say yes to it.
Yep.
Like even if it tips you over the edge, right? You won't know where that edge is if you always say no.
Agreed.
If you don't venture out.
Yep.
So I've always said yes to opportunities and, it's allowed me to find where my tolerance level is. Now I know like how much I can push and I can probably push more than I have. Then I'll continually, try to find where that edge is or where that tolerance is by like saying yes and taking on opportunities. So
I love that.
Find something that you have some ambition for.
Yep.
Say yes to opportunities. And if you have ambition, it doesn't matter if you fail or if something changes in your life, you've got ambition to fall back on.
100%. Yeah.
So it keeps you on the right track, keeps your trajectory pointing upwards.
I like that. So what's next for you? What are you currently working on?
Yeah.
Give me the rundown. Next 12 months.
Next 12 months. Well, I plan on training a lot more. I've been loving my training recently.
Yep.
I mean, my 3-year kind of PhD was tricky in the sense of juggling things. So I wasn't training as much as I'd like, but training more now and enjoying it. So a lot more of that. And research is taking a step back.
Yep. Okay.
Because I've done a lot of it and I still want to do it, but it's just on the back burner now. I'm also helping other students with their research, which is pretty cool. Still obviously coaching. So plan on, coaching more and devoting more time to that and, traveling and presenting and kind of sharing knowledge. That's, a big passion of mine.
Yep.
And I've got some, opportunities lined up for presenting
Awesome.
later this year, which, is fun and is always something I look forward to doing. So more of that would be amazing.
Yep. And where can the listeners find you?
Mostly on Instagram. So MR Fitness with a _. All my research can be found there. Put out some content here and there, which people can stay tuned for. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help.
Awesome. I appreciate you coming on. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys for listening to this episode of Tabby Talks, where we chat all things fitness, business, lifestyle, and a little bit of shit.